Hey, Roger here. Our biggest online event of the year is about to happen where we take a volunteer, put them in the hot seat, build the retirement plan on air, and then share the results with you live. This is all coming soon, and you can register for Retirement Plan Live at livewithroger.com. New Year's Eve is one of the most overrated holidays of the year. But I'll tell you what, I am so looking forward to ringing in 2021. And I am also excited about finishing up the parent project this week on the Retirement Answer Man Show. Hey, welcome to the show. My name is Roger Whitney. I am your host. I'm so excited for 2021. This is the show dedicated to helping you not just survive retirement, but truly to rock retirement, to make it the best season of your life. So today we're going to finish up this parent project, which felt like an important project to try to do well. And hopefully we've accomplished that for you and shared some stories from experts, obviously, but from people that have walked this journey to help better prepare you to have the conversation. So hopefully we lived up to that responsibility. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about some tips for managing parents' finances with Christine Benz from Morningstar, who's a wonderful lady, has walked this journey. And then we're also going to bring on the first subject we ever did for our Retirement Plan Live case studies, because we're starting one next week in January. We are going to do a case study with someone who was recently laid off, really been thrown for a loop by it. And we're going to walk through helping her and her spouse make sense of it all and move forward. But today we're going to talk with CARL, our first Retirement Plan Live subject, and now well known as Fritz Gilbert from the Retirement Manifesto blog, which is an excellent blog, and talk about Retirement Plan Live as well. But before we do any of that, I want to talk about a word that I've thought a lot about in this parent project, and that is gracefully.
Huh? What does that mean?
So at the beginning of this series, we talked about the stages of aging. You have independence, then interdependence, then dependency, and crisis management, and then end of life. All of us are going to go through some of those stages as we age. Some of them might be very quick. You don't even notice them. Some of them might be very drawn out. We just don't know which ones those are going to be, and our parents don't know which ones those are going to be as well. So when I think of these stages and us as children helping guide our parents and being there with them, I think of the word gracefully. What does that mean? Gracefully, in a respectful and dignified way. Gracefully, in an attractively elegant way. And I think a beautiful gift that we can give to our parents, to someone we love that is aging and ahead of us on this journey, is to help them age and go through these various stages as gracefully as they can. And it's a good role for us because we're not in it. When you're in it, sometimes you lose perspective because it's scary. It can be hard. It's confusing. And for us as the children, we can help them make it gracefully, attractive, in an elegant way, a dignified way. And God willing, if we can have these dialogues with our children and the people that we love, when we get to that stage of life, they'll be better prepared to help us do it gracefully. So Christine Benz works for Morningstar. She is a prolific writer. She writes a lot about long-term care and has walked this journey of helping manage parent finances. And I think the title of this show is 5 Tips for Managing Your Parents' Finances. Actually, we just have a very open conversation about what to do when you're dealing with siblings and you're dealing with parents to help them have grace, dignity, and agency. So let's have this chat with Christine. So Christine, I'm excited to have you chatting with us because, one, you're just a financial expert. Is that fair to say? Would you call yourself?
I suppose. Yes. Thank you. I suppose I would.
Yeah, it's weird calling yourself that. But also, you've walked this journey of the parent project with your parents. And so you have both perspectives, which is important because when you're dealing with money, and that's what we're talking about today, you sort of have two hats to wear, right? What the official financial best practices is, and then what it is when you actually hit the ground and dealing with siblings. So give us an idea of your perspective on managing finances with parents.
Well, it can be really fraught. And part of the problem, Roger, is that all families are so different, and family dynamics among siblings can be really varied, as well as parent-child relationships. So this is an area where it can be really hard to dispense one-size-fits-all advice, because what might work for one family may not work for another. And then another factor in the mix, one that we had in play in my own family, is the issue of cognitive decline, which may or may not be an issue with parents. So it's definitely hard to say, do this, because I don't know your family. I don't know your family history. I don't know your parents' history with money. But a couple of things I think about. One is just the value of communication, and to the extent that you and your parents are comfortable conversing about those matters, getting those discussions started earlier rather than later. One kind of icebreaker that I think works in a variety of situations is to talk to your parents about what you're doing with your own financial life and open up the line of communication from you to them and say, hey, my husband and I are creating an estate plan for the first time. We've never done this. Do you remember what it was like when you did yours? We're trying to select guardians for our children, or whatever your actual issues might be. I think that that's a great way to begin the dialogue.
And that word has been a theme throughout the month unintentionally, which is creating a dialogue of a lot of little conversations rather than sort of, hey, we have to have a talk. Right?
Exactly.
And I like that idea of our generation are dealing with parents from a different generation who are a little bit more private about money and documents. And I like that idea of asking for help on yours.
Yes.
With the intent of really starting to discover what they have in place.
Exactly. And also it can be self-serving. I mean, there's a lot of wisdom there for you. And I would say rely on your parents. I think that many times they have been really thoughtful and they've had more experiences than you have had. And so you may well learn something from them as well. It's not just a ploy to gain access to information about their financial matters. There may be something for you to gain as well.
So when you're dealing with multiple siblings, usually it makes sense to have one in charge. Do you have any wisdom from navigating that, from who's going to make the decision so it's not a committee?
Right. For me, I would say it was pretty obvious in that I was the person who worked in the financial services industry in my family and also in close geographic proximity to my mom and dad. So was over spending time with them frequently. But generally speaking, I think it should be the one who is most closely in contact with the parents on a day-to-day basis. It should also be a financially well child, which can be an issue. In fact, I was getting together with some friends who are CFPs, and I talked about this issue of adult children relying on financial help from parents. And it was almost like we had a support group on the spot among my friends who deal with this so often with their colleagues, where parents overhelp adult children. So it should be a financially well child who's helping the parents, because that can definitely be an issue if you have adult children in the mix who are not financially well and perhaps overly reliant on the parents for financial aid.
Yeah, it's a big issue from my seat as an advisor, for sure. I can think of one instance, clients I've worked with for ages, where one passed away and they specifically moved everything to a trust for their surviving parent because they knew that the children were not financially sound and were going to keep on asking. And as a parent, sometimes social dynamics are you'll sacrifice your finances for the love of your children sometimes.
Right. We see this a lot. And I do think that this is an excellent spot for a professional to be in the mix, where if the parents aren't comfortable saying enough is enough, and oftentimes they aren't, it's a great role for the professional to play, to serve as the intermediary in this situation, because it does come up a lot.
Yeah. So what other tips in your journey of managing money for someone else to try to, obviously, one, trying to make it last, but two, knowing that there's these other interested parties once they do pass?
Right. Well, I guess one thing to know is a common configuration in a lot of households, and Roger, you probably encounter this as well with clients, is for one person to be the household financial manager. So one spouse to be the bill payer, the person who keeps tabs on the checkbook and so forth, and to have the other be the investment manager. And a real common configuration, although it's not necessarily the case, is for the female to be the household financial manager and the male partner to be the investment manager. So I think as you approach this as an adult child, to think about this potentially being divided into two major pieces, I think that can be a helpful way to think about it, that the investments and the estate plan are sort of one side of it, and the managing the bills is another side of it. So I think you want to think about those two sets of individuals, assuming that you have two individuals tackling those tasks, that maybe it is sort of a two-part process for you as an adult child who wants to help, that maybe you're approaching both people and helping them with whatever jobs they're doing, and also gauging their ability to continue to do those jobs.
Yeah, because those are definitely two different roles. One is just the logistical stuff of paying the bills and making sure cash flow management. And then on the investment side, or the structure side, is the longer term planning. Do we have enough? How do we make it last?
Right.
And so forth. As you navigated this, were there any wisdom from navigating this with the parents that are needing the help, but maybe aren't quite willing to give it up, or just navigating that whole discussion?
Yeah, I would say one thing that kind of blindsided me, as much as I felt equipped to be helping, was that I had been helping my dad with the investments, and he had always been an investor. And so for us, it had always been a very comfortable discussion. And I thought that that was the bigger area where I would be able to help. And then when my dad eventually experienced cognitive decline, it was quite seamless. I was on all of his accounts, and we had gotten the portfolio quite streamlined. And so everything was going along fine there. The issue was that as my mom was increasingly helping my dad through this process, she had been the day-to-day household financial manager, and eventually had a fall and entered rehab. And so I was able to do some discovery on what was going on with her. And mostly everything looked just fine. But I noticed that she had missed an insurance payment, missed their supplemental insurance payment, which would have been a big deal had they had some healthcare issue arise during that time. As it turned out, it wasn't a problem. But I realized that the person who I had not been concerned with at all needed some help too. The person I thought was on autopilot and needed no help whatsoever. So I would say that just don't assume that everything is perfectly fine in one area of your parents' financial plan. Be willing to probe in the areas where you think maybe they don't need any help.
That's a really good point, because that's a lot of stress on a spouse.
Yes, absolutely.
Whether they want to admit it or not, it takes a toll seeing a loved one, you losing that relationship in some ways, or having it change significantly.
There's a grieving going on. And I would say oftentimes for families, it's kind of during that discovery process where things can be really problematic, where you're sort of coming to grips with what's going on. And I remember at this particular point in time, we didn't have a firm sort of household care plan in place for my dad. It was a little bit sort of cobbled together. We didn't have full-time caregivers yet at that point. And so, yes, my mom was the person who was tasked with doing the lion's share of his care. I'm sure there was a grieving process going on as well. Although I will say, as someone who's gone through that, it really does help to lose someone very slowly. When the end finally does come, you've come to terms. You've had a number of years oftentimes to come to grips with that process. But anyway, those sort of turning points can be areas where things can really slip through the cracks. In terms of having difficult discussions, that's not something I've had firsthand experiences with. But I do think that easing into assistance is really the way to go if you possibly can, where you're maybe saying, I'm not going to be on the account, but can I potentially have access to your online bank just to see how things are going so I can step in and provide help if need be? Carolyn McClanahan, who I know you know, Roger, who is, I think, really a thought leader in this area, put it really well in that she suggested adult children say, I want to be as good a helper as I can be. Help me do this job. So sort of couch the request in that sort of framing where you're saying, I just want to make sure that I don't drop the ball here if I need to help. And I think that can be a nice way to do it.
And I think the original suggestion you had in terms of how you pose it, in terms of asking for help, and then this way, they both hit on a key thing that I think people lose as they age, which is, and go through this journey, is agency.
Exactly.
There's nothing worse than feeling like you're out of control, you don't have control anymore. So the more you can frame all the discussions to give them that, the more engaged they will be and the more they'll have agency.
I love that way of putting it, which is absolutely true. I mean, there's so much loss going on during this period for you as a child, as well as for your parents, a great sense of loss. So if you can possibly help your parents maintain what was essentially them and maintain the dignity that they carried through life, I think that that's just huge.
And you brought up the idea of having a professional involved. And I think sometimes, especially when there are siblings, and I know I've had this situation where it offloads the burden of responsibility. Like in your case, you had the burden of managing the finances, and whether it was spoken or not, reporting to your siblings as well as your parents. That's a big burden.
Mm-hmm. It is. And I think that keeping communication lines open with the siblings is really important. Also dividing and conquering with your siblings. So one understanding I had with another sister who lived in the same community where we all live was that because I was doing a lot of hands-on management with my parents in their house and helping keep their household up and running and managing the caregivers as well as the financial piece, a sister handled most of the doctor appointments, which, as you know, for older adults, that's a really important component of care as well, making sure that prescriptions are picked up and various doctors are seen. So she did a lot of that. So to the extent that you have multiple siblings, I think it really can be helpful to divide and conquer. And of course, there will be occasions where that can't happen, where I did my share of doctor appointments with my parents as well. But it really helped us to split things up and understand who was doing what.
So you're an expert. We said that right at the beginning. And you've walked this journey personally. So I'm curious, what, if anything, have you changed in your plan in terms of management of finances or estate planning documents or communication?
It's different for me, Roger, because my husband and I don't have children. And so we understand that our plan will need to be different than was the case for my parents with so many children in place. So I think that we will be much more reliant on professional help, on professional care than was the case with my parents and me. But I will say we are lucky to have a number of close family connections, younger people in our lives who we trust and who are close parts of our lives who we'll be able to hopefully rely on for some of the kind of softer parts of our plan where professionals may not be able to help us. It's also made me much more attuned to the issue of long-term care and what our long-term care plan will be, which I have to say we have not fully figured out.
It's a hard one.
We're in the process. It's a hard one. We probably will self-fund long-term care expenses when all is said and done, but we've definitely thought hard about how that will affect the rest of our financial plan and want to make sure that we have those assets segregated from our spendable in retirement assets.
Yeah, that's very interesting because you've written a lot about long-term care and you participated in a long-term care series in February of this year and you don't have it figured out. It shows the lack of maturity in that industry still, that there isn't something that you can feel really confident about because of the lack of underwriting and claims experience. It's a really emerging industry still.
It is. And unfortunately, the type of product that I would be interested in really doesn't exist, which is I would be comfortable paying for both my husband and myself a significant long-term care expense out of our coffers. What worries me is the idea of some sort of extended catastrophic long-term care need for one or both of us. So those products with the very long elimination periods that would pay you for sort of a tail risk long-term care incident, unfortunately don't exist. That the state insurance regulators have not allowed those types of products, but I actually think that there's an appetite for those types of products. That's what I would be interested in. And unfortunately, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I was talking to Steve Kane, who works a lot in policy on that. And he said the same thing. It's like, there is a big appetite for sure, but it's the regulators that just aren't comfortable with them, is my understanding.
Right.
And you bring up a second issue, you and your husband, because generally the spouse is the one doing most of the care, right? And then you have children. In your case, you were able to step up and pick up the baton for your mom to some extent. And planning for that, because God willing, it never happens, but in the situation will likely be both of you are elderly.
Right.
And in a different stage of life, and having professionals, even to be navigators of all of the medical. Is there anybody that does that? Just to be a navigator of Medicare and long-term care facilities that can walk alongside somebody that doesn't have a family
There are
member?
professionals who do this. In fact, I have a close friend whose father lives out of town, and she and her sister have hired a professional to essentially navigate care for him. So to take stock of his needs, to determine what type of in-home care he might need. And so there absolutely is that role. I would expect to see more of that, especially in the decades ahead as we have more and more folks aging without significant child networks. Yeah. Families are smaller as the years go by. And so I think we'll be seeing more of those care navigators. And it would be great to see that field emerge because I think there'll be a real need.
Definitely. I think you're right. Christine, thank you so much for sharing some of your wisdom.
Thank you so much, Roger. It's been my pleasure.
So now, in preparation for next week's Retirement Plan Live with Tricia, let's have a chat with CARL.Fritz Gilbert of the Retirement Manifesto, a very energetic guy, and in some ways, the spark that started all of this. So we're going to end this walk down memory road in regards to Retirement Plan Live with where it all began with CARL and Can CARL Retire, a.k.a. Fritz, a.k.a. Retirement Manifesto. CARL, Fritz, how are you doing?
Roger, I'm doing great. It's great to reunite with you. I think back to that first episode we did, and I think you and I were just kind of brainstorming on the concept, and I am really pleased after however many years it's been now that this has really become a popular segment for your listeners. I think it brings tremendous value. You know, we're all facing that same decision, right? Can we retire? What do we have to look at? How do we go through the process? And it's kind of neat to think back to, you know, it all started just you and I chatting about, hey, we should try this. And it's turned into a pretty good deal. So I think it's fun to listen to them every year and see how you're mixing it up with different type of profiles and the issues that everybody's facing. They're similar, but they're different. It's a fascinating way to talk about retirement.
Yeah, and it actually was your idea. I think you proposed it as a blog post and we didn't even know each other.
I did. I reached out to you. And actually, I'll be honest, I was a little bit selfish. I've always been a DIY guy and I wanted to get a professional insight, but I didn't want to pay for it. Right. So I'm like, you know, and I had listened to you for years. I mean, you never even knew who I was, but I've been listening to the Retirement Answer Man since you started. And I was like, hey, I'll reach out to that Roger guy. He seems like a nice guy, and I'll float the idea and be anonymous, and maybe he'll be interested. And I had no idea that it would turn into kind of an annual tradition with, I think, pretty popular response from all your listeners. So.
Yeah, I think there's something interesting and instructive about hearing other people on a similar journey.
Yeah.
We always want to know how we compare to others, but how they're thinking about the same issues and how they're dealing with similar issues. It's hard to get, right? It's not like
Yeah.
you can talk to your neighbor most of the time or a family member, especially if you're retiring a little earlier and have done things well on the financial end. So it's a little weird to get that.
Yeah. Yeah.
that
And I
perspective.
think you being a financial professional, you get that every day because that's what you do, but your listeners don't, right? It's a black hole for those of us who aren't in the profession. And to kind of get a chance to be a little bit voyeuristic and look into how other people are going through the process when you don't normally have that exposure to it makes it even more interesting because it's just not something that we have any way of getting insight to. So, and then to see how you work with them and how you work through the process and the issues that you need to think about and how you run the math and understanding that process theoretically is one thing, but seeing it applied in practice with a real situation just makes it that much more valuable.
Yeah, and that's how you take away, okay, well, how you adjust your own planning. So tell me how you're doing. Now, when we talked, you were still in Atlanta. You were doing the day job. You had this cabin. Fast forward, I forget how many years now. And I know you're retired. So are you rocking retirement or is this not what you thought it was?
I tell you what, Roger, these are the absolute best years of my life. We are absolutely loving it. So executive summary, I guess. Yeah, I think when we talked, we were trying to decide if I could retire by 54. And we decided that I could based on the numbers. I was probably 50 or 51 at the time. And I hadn't started my blog yet. It was actually because of talking to you that I said, I kind of like this topic. I like this area. And that's what led to the Retirement Manifesto, which has become a big passion of mine.
Huge blog.
Yeah, it's done well. I just enjoy writing and I love the interaction with the readers. But anyway, so I wasn't retired yet, but I retired at age 55 about 2.5 years ago. I waited 1 year longer than your numbers said we could do it just because I'm a very conservative guy. And I was in a pension situation at work. And as you probably know, the value of those pensions really compound in your final couple of years of work. So I did the numbers and I said, I could walk away at 54, but man, look at the net present value of that future pension stream that I'd give up by working one more year. And life was good. We'd moved to the cabin. I had a small apartment down in the city. We downsized. We sold the house in the city. We moved to the cabin. I got a small apartment for the last couple of years of work and went down on Monday, came home on Thursday. It was tolerable. And we knew that we were working towards a goal. So we said, you know what? Let's just buffer everything a little bit. Let's do one more year. And now I'm 2.5 years into retirement. Absolutely no regrets with the approach. Having that little bit of cushion in the financials, we don't worry about the financial side at all. We're very comfortable that we've got it well established and we're just living life. We're living in the mountains. We're traveling. We're pursuing our passions. My wife has started a nonprofit that keeps us busy. And we're in that go-go phase of retirement when we're relatively young, we're healthy. And I tell you, it's great. It really is a great phase in life.
There's two areas I want to explore on this. The first is I've had conversations with many people where financially it's clear it works, right?
Yep.
But they can't really believe it or feel comfortable enough with it to pull the trigger. And so it always ends up being, well, one more year, I'm making the best income in my life.
Yeah.
My pension, all these things I'll be able to save for another year. And they're never able to pull the trigger and they delay it, even though they know intellectually that, hey, it works today.
Yeah.
So how did you get over, I'm leaving at the top of my game and that's okay?
Yeah, that's a great topic to talk about. You could do a whole podcast on exactly that issue. I think the way I look at it, Roger, there's some people who do one more year, then one more year, then one more year, then one more year. And I think in a lot of cases, I'm not a psychiatrist or anything, but I think typically once the numbers, if you're down to a 3% safe withdrawal rate or below that, and you're still continuing to work, I think you really need to ask yourself, why am I continuing to work, right? If you get down to a 2% safe withdrawal rate, you know you're not working for the money. And I think typically when people get into that situation, more than likely, it's kind of that fear of the unknown. It's hard to change. It's a big change to go into retirement. And a lot of people are anxious about it. And my view, and some of the readers that I've talked to and things like that, they're not working because they need the money. They're just working. Maybe they like their job and that's okay. But it's those people that are only working because they're kind of afraid of the unknown and I'm afraid I'll get bored. I don't know what I'm going to do. And that's the only reason they're working. I really hope people like that make the plunge. In our case, number one, I've always wanted to retire. My life has always been about a lot more than work. And we did the one more year, one time, really because, like I said, I'm conservative. We wanted to hedge. We're about 3 to 3.25% on our safe withdrawal rate. So I knew we were very safe on our spending, on our withdrawal to cover our spending. And I knew that basically from that point forward, I would be working without really needing to for the financial side of it. I felt like there's so much more that I would rather do with my time than go into the office every day when I no longer had to. And to me, it was a pretty easy decision.
You hit on the second part. And I was having a conversation, I was in Duluth, as you know, and I was talking with an advisor, and we're looking at potentially collaborating. And one of her comments is she has younger children, single mother, and raising kids are hard, as you know. And she was talking about how raising kids are hard, and sometimes working and ignoring that part of my life and focusing on work is actually easier. It's more enjoyable because we have agency and control as much as we think. And it made me think of this issue when it comes to retirement, in that in work, we can complain about certain things, travel or superiors or team or whatever, but it's our fiefdom. We can organize it and we understand how it works, and it's not near as emotional in the interactions and deeper things. And a lot of times that's easier than going home either with your spouse or your children or just with yourself and having to figure out that domain. Do you think that might play a role?
I don't doubt that it does for some people. What came to my mind as you were talking through that, I just had an email from a reader just a couple days ago, actually. And the guy was really struggling with making the decision to retire. Didn't need to work anymore for money. But the guy was like a subject matter expert in this topic. He was really well renowned in his field. And he said, I just can't imagine intentionally putting myself into a situation where my expertise doesn't really matter anymore. So to me,
identity.
It's an identity thing. It's maybe some ego, right? I'm not sure what.
Ego's good to a point.
Yep. And, if you're fairly high up in an organization and you've got some authority, it's fun to be in charge, right? I ran a plant when I was in working days, and it's fun to be the boss, right? Let's not kid ourselves. And I think some people just look at the black hole of retirement and say, I'm not going to have any of that. And the way I responded to that guy, I thought about it. I actually asked him if he'd mind if I write a post about it, and I may do that. I haven't yet. But I basically said, when I was working, I was in the aluminum business. And I said, I've spoke at conferences with 500 of the top leaders in the world of aluminum, right? Not bragging here, just giving the context. So I was kind of perceived as a guy that knew what was going on in the world. I could speak to anybody in the industry and they'd like, hey, this guy knows what's going on. I could talk about China. I could talk about Europe, South America, Asia, globally. None of that matters anymore at all, right? This is the first time, other than the email to him, that I've even mentioned aluminum in the last however long. It's not even relevant. And I said, the reality of it is, yeah, you're right. When you get into retirement, that stuff that you did when you were working, it doesn't really matter anymore. I've got many, many retired friends. I don't know what half of them did when they were working.
The titles, the status.
Doesn't matter. So I think you're right. The key in what I told this guy is, I would really encourage you to spend some time thinking about what you'd like to build in retirement that replaces those things that you lose in the workplace, right? So that's a little different than your angle of, hey, it's easier than having to deal with some of the
you have to create a new self. That's intimidating, right? It can be an amazing adventure or it can be intimidating. It's going to end up being a little bit of both, but some of us lean towards intimidated, others towards amazing adventure. And you're a good example of that, right?
Yeah.
I think also, and we've talked about it on the show before, like I'll take me, the hardest question for me to answer is, what do I do?
Yeah.
I don't know how to answer that. Sure, I'm an advisor and I'm an educator, but a better way to answer it, those are labels of something that I am, like I'm a subject matter expert on aluminum or whatever this gentleman was. Another way of answering that is separating your identity from the title. Like, I am a curious guy who loves to show people how to do things and think of ways of communicating in relatable ways.
Yeah.
And I choose to do that by being an educator and by being a financial advisor. So when you lose the title, you don't lose the identity.
Yeah. Great way to think about it.
Yeah. That's hard.
I think the other thing I tell people, I look at my wife as an example. She kind of went through this thing where her mom passed away and she'd been a long-term caregiver. Before that, she'd taken care of our daughter. So suddenly kind of her life's work was behind her. Now I'm home and I don't need much care, right? And what she did is she started this nonprofit based purely, she happened to be watching a YouTube video or something. Maybe it was on Facebook. Mike Rowe does this topic where they profile charities, and he profiled this charity out in Oregon that basically builds free fences for low-income families that leave their dogs on a chain. Because
which seems like such an odd thing. I never would have thought of that when your wife started this.
It gets even better because she's like, man, like it just lit a spark in her, Roger. She's like, I should do that here because there's a lot of dogs. We live in the Appalachian Mountains, so there's a lot of dogs on chains. And she just like, I ought to do that here. And I was like, yeah, you should. Never built a fence in her life. Didn't have any idea how to start a nonprofit. We're now a year and a half into it. We've built 24 fences. She's got a board of directors. She's a legal 501c3. She's having a blast. And the takeaway from that I see, that I tell people exactly the situation you're talking about, is foster that curiosity. And if you see something that kind of piques your interest, take a step. See where it goes. Look at my blog. I had never written a blog. I was like, I'm just going to try this, bluehost.com. I didn't know what I was doing. I set up my website and I love it. It's become a passion. She had no idea how to build a fence, how to start a nonprofit, but she was interested. She took a first step. And both of us, in very different ways, have found very fulfilling things to pursue in retirement. But the common element of both of those was to listen and foster that curiosity, because our curiosity has been subdued since we were kids, right?
Yeah.
You're so formed into culture that you've got to, et cetera. So foster the curiosity that's been dormant for so many years and be courageous enough to take the first step in anything that interests you and see where it leads. I think that's probably the key. At least it has been in my case and others that I've talked to and written about and read about. Those two keys, the curiosity and the courage, I think are really fundamental pieces that people need to really grab onto.
Yeah, when I think of the gentleman that we're sort of sidebarring here on something else.
Yeah, we are. I know, but it's fun. I always love talking to you.
Yeah, and when I think of the gentleman in the email that you said, I thought of two things. One is, fine, stay this expert, but carve out a period of time to do what you're just saying, to start creating a life other than that, right? People go into retirement generally two ways. One is they're pushed out literally, or because I can't take it anymore, right? And they just quit. Or they retire because they've started to create this vision to where it just is so compelling. Like you were so excited about this life that you were stepping into. It was an obvious decision, right? Yeah. And I think for this gentleman is, don't figure it out right now, but start to carve some time to create a vision of the other side in that adventure. And eventually, if you nurture that, whether it's an hour a week to begin with or whatever else, it will become so compelling, the decision will be obvious.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's number one. And the second is, it's okay to say, I'm not ready for that journey yet. Doesn't matter what the numbers say, right? Yeah. If they enjoy their job, they enjoy the prestige, it's okay to not let it be something that you're in conflict about. Just say, I'm not ready for that journey yet. And that's cool.
Nothing wrong with that at all. I like your idea of kind of this phased retirement where maybe there's something you can do that's kind of part-time that still gives you that fulfillment you get through work while you're growing the other post-work part of your life. I mean, there's so many different ways you can go about it. I think the people that struggle the most are the hard-charging type A, workaholic, my whole life is tied up in work, who suddenly get pushed out through a downsizing and they never saw it coming, right? That's the hardest.
Definitely.
And even they ultimately make it through, right? I mean, it's a harder transition, but you figure it out. Let me step back here. I think it's really interesting that you and I are having this discussion when you're talking about the case studies. If you think about when we did Can Carl Retire, it's all about the numbers, right? And you ask about, hey, what's your lifestyle going to be and what's your ideal retirement? And you go through all that, but it's all about the numbers. I've been retired 2.5 years now. You talk to hundreds of retirees. It's interesting that we started out talking about these case studies, which are great, and yet the conversation has evolved entirely away from money. I think why I brought that up is, to me, that's been my experience with retirement. As you're preparing for retirement, as you're talking to Roger and saying, hey, can I make it? Let's do my numbers. You're really focused on the money. But what you find from most people who have had successful retirements, and this is really a big focus in my book, is it's the non-financial stuff that you really need to spend at least the same amount of time on. And I would argue probably more than you do on the financials, because that's really where you're going to find real joy and happiness in retirement.
Oh, I totally agree. A lot of what I do ends up being non-financial, or bringing it all, the meaning to the money. I think March of 21, we're doing a whole month on creating your non-financial plan.
There you go.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And you gave a good segue of we're dealing with, in a week, someone who has had an unexpected retirement or accelerated retirement. And we'll definitely dive into some of the non-financial things.
I'm looking forward to listening to it, Roger. I always love these, and it's fun to think back to when we kicked this all off with Can Carl Retire? And it's really neat to see where it's going. And I think you've done a great job of growing it and really looking at really different situations each year. I think that's really been a great way to grow the concept and make it applicable to everybody. I would guess by now you've probably done, 5 of these or so?
5 or 6, yeah.
Almost anybody can relate to at least a few of the people, right? They're close enough to a few of the people that advice you give and the discussions you have really resonates with a lot of people. And I think especially with the COVID thing that's been going on, a lot of people are going to be able to relate to this one because there are a lot of retirees that have been forced out, or maybe their employer is starting to open the doors up again. And they're like, I don't really want to deal with that commute. I've been working from home. I kind of like it. So they're intentionally deciding to retire. The point being, there's a lot of people that are retiring probably sooner than they had expected. So I think this is going to be an absolutely excellent episode or series here. And I'm really looking forward to listening to it.
Buddy, I'm glad to see you rocking retirement.
I love it, Roger. Thank you for all your mentorship and leadership over the years. Let's stay in touch.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off. Set a little baby step we can take in the next 7 days to not just rock life, but rock retirement. All right, the next 7 days. How about we just focus on getting through tomorrow, the last day of 2020. And this may have been very impactful to you because of COVID or job loss. Maybe you've been insulated from it directly, but let's just focus on getting through this year and starting off 2021 in a proactive way so we can make the most of whatever it holds for us. So that's your action over the next day or so. All right, so it's the second to last day of the year. It's the last show of 2020, and we're about 6 years in, maybe 7 years into the show, and we've done a lot of things on the show. We've had a lot of great themes that we focused on. You've provided a lot of great questions and feedback and constructive criticism to help improve the show. And I just want to tell you how awesome it is to walk this with you. And going forward, we already have the themes laid out for all of next year, and we'll pivot as circumstances require. But we're going to try to continue to do these deep dives in one specific subject each month. To give you an idea of some of the subjects that we're going to be doing in all of 21, we have choosing the right withdrawal strategy. And we're going to explore the different withdrawal strategies. How to stay physically healthy in retirement is going to be a monthly theme. What you should do when you're on the approach to retirement within 5 years. Understanding investment vehicles. We're going to explore that for a month. How to build a non-financial retirement plan. Choosing your Social Security strategy, we're going to address in June. So we have a number of topics for each month. And I just wanted to thank you for being a listener. Thank you for all the emails and participating. And here's to a wonderful 2021. I hope the best for you and your family. Hey, it's time for that all-important disclaimer. We so appreciate you listening to the show and love your questions and love the teaching that we're able to provide here. And actually, it helps us too. But remember, you're not our clients.
Not love it if you took advice from us on the show.
We would not love it if you took advice from us on the show. Realize this is helpful in education. Talk to your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before you make any decisions.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.